equals in the dim and haunting hours of a city that was reluctantly shaking off its deep slumber. David Hargrove stood alone on a balcony, feeling the penetrating chill of autumn whispering soft nothings around him like a ghostly embrace. He squinted into the gathering shadows of an awakening urban landscape, surveying a skyline that had once ignited the passionate fires of his creativity. As an architect by trade, he had envisioned himself weaving grand and soaring structures into the dense urban tapestry. Yet at this moment in time, the skeletal forms of his many unfinished projects echoed a suffocating silence that weighed heavily on his soul. Their decaying facades reflected his own profound sense of failure, stirring a tumult of bittersweet memories deep within the recesses of his mind. His latest venture, a contemporary arts complex designed with the lofty aim of breathing vibrant life into a deeply neglected and long-forgotten neighborhood, had been envisioned as his artistic ticket to recovery, a path that would pave the way for him to reclaim not only his career, but also to rediscover a sense of true identity. Instead, here he found himself facing a lonely and haunting evening, all too aware of the shadows that slipped into his thoughts like whispers from a long-forgotten past. In the fading distance, the flickering lights of the sprawling city flickered like the fragile hope that had once thrived in his heart. But now that hope felt weary and tattered, tarnished by an overwhelming ambition that had soured and decayed over time. Fleeting echoes of laughter filled his mind, the jubilant and joyous sounds of his wife, Sarah, and their two children, once so close and cherished, now sounding like distant memories fading into the void. They had been ever supportive of his visions, enthusiastic and eager for the future they could build together, brick by brick. Yet every late night spent hunched over blueprints in the office, and every neglected family dinner slowly took a heavy toll on his happiness, each absence chipping away at the foundational love that had been painstakingly built over years and years of shared experiences. With every misstep, he felt increasingly trapped in a suffocating silence, betraying the very family he sought to elevate and raise higher. It had all started with an innocuous decision, simply attending a networking event where he encountered Thomas Graves, a man whose undeniable charisma was underpinned by a shroud of dubious shortcuts and questionable ethics. After a few rounds of drinks and discussions thick with ambition and promise, David found himself ensnared by seductive promises of prestige and wealth, of an enticing future that beckoned him. Thomas spoke of success with a boldness that was both exhilarating and terrifying. Profits, advantages gained at all costs, bending and even breaking the ethical compass. "What's the price of your dreams?" he had laughed, eyes glinting with a mercenary glimmer. "Sometimes, it takes stepping over a few bodies to reach what you desire." The lingering unease that pooled deep in David's stomach was momentarily eclipsed by the seductive glow of recognition and success. His youthful idealism, that bright beacon of hope and resilience, dimmed in the face of such overwhelming temptation. Choices he had once adamantly contested slipped away unnoticed, projects simplified to chase quicker returns, essential safety guidelines disregarded for the sake of daring aesthetics that would elicit gasps of awe. Each decision he made was a thief in the night, unraveling both his integrity and the ties to the life he had once cherished so dearly. As time marched inexorably forward, what were once thrilling accomplishments began to feel hollow and vacant, echoes of joy replaced by shadows of regret. Memories of family trips spent exploring and leisurely breakfasts where fluffy pancakes were shared, gentle embraces with Sarah, all drowned under the insurmountable weight of his guilt. The tension of his unfulfilled ambitions coiled tightly in his gut as he pictured how the decay of his values and principles slithered into each and every one of his designs, tainting them with regret. With a false sense of justification, he convinced himself that it was all truly for them. If he could just secure a better life for his family, surely they would understand the sacrifices he was making. Yet the silence at home, the empty chairs at dinner, Sarah's questioning gaze, the children's disappointed looks, began to unravel him completely. The burden of his ethical decline grew heavier with each passing day, stripping away the carefully constructed veneer of his aspirations and dreams. Days turned into endless months, and one particularly crisp autumn evening, the heavy consequences of his reckless choices reached a stifling climax. David wandered into that very neighborhood he had once aspired to revive, the very place where laughter and life had thrived, and art had flourished. Instead, he found nothing but dilapidation. Shattered bottles littered the dreary streets, drug paraphernalia, and the gaunt figure of a homeless man struck him like a jagged knife, an agonizing reminder of what he had forsaken in his relentless pursuit of empty ambitions. "Bastard," he muttered bitterly to himself, the word resonating within him like the echo of his own failures. Those streets carried the intolerable weight of families displaced by his ambition, dreams crushed under the heavy burdens of his aspirations, a painful truth. Time continued to blur onward until an ordinary Tuesday shattered his already fragile existence into tiny pieces. A disheveled young woman approached him hesitantly, handing him a crumpled photograph of a boy, bright-eyed and full of childish dreams. Her voice trembled as she spoke of a brother lost to the indifference of reckless development, each word hitting him with the unrelenting force of his own failures. "He was my brother," she uttered, and in that moment, David felt bile rise in his throat, realizing that the child was indeed a victim of his misguided aims, a life deemed irrelevant in the cold calculations of profit margins and development gains. The weight of his past choices bore down on him with a ferocious intensity, revealing the collateral damage he had so blatantly ignored. This was not just a moment of simple reckoning. It was the slow, inexorable accumulation of consequence that had now begun to crush him beneath its cruel weight. Each wrong turn he made weighed heavily against the boy's innocent face, annihilating his rationalizations and exposing the profound grief lurking within his heart. Haunted by this painful revelation, sleepless nights filled with dreams of his family ensued, reminders of what he'd sacrificed, intermingled with a silence he could no longer bear. Guilt grew wings, inexorable and heavy, and he longed for redemption, yet acknowledged that perhaps true redemption was not meant for the unblemished, but rather for those who bravely embraced their darkness as an integral part of the light. In his search for solace, he found himself engaged in countless conversations, pouring out his heart to Sarah, frantic exchanges that crumbled under the weight of their shared but unspoken heartache. Her gentle touch caused his resolve to tremble as her eyes reflected sorrow, compassion, and pain. The disconnect clawed at him. His mistakes were not merely his burdens to bear, but had cast long, dark shadows over the sacred unity of their family. Drowning deeply in regret, David wandered the desolate and forgotten streets, tracing paths that led him further and further away from his once steadfast moral compass. Each nod from passersby ignited a flickering internal fire within him, illuminating the lives that were intricately woven with his own. Regret embedded itself further into his psyche, crystallizing around the young woman's brother, a tragic testament to the painful price of reckless ambition. In an outpouring of desperation, David pledged to implement profound change, yet change demanded a fierce bravery, an arduous journey burdened with guilt, hope, and the fragile nature of forgiveness. As he turned the doorknob of his past, the weight of what he could not change dulled the brilliance of his intentions. The flimsy thread of morality pulled him into tumult, each tentative step toward restitution a daunting twist that left him breathless. Eventually, with his heart torn wide open for all to see, he faced the family whose lives he had irrevocably altered without a second thought. Their humble home was filled with warmth and laughter punctuating the air, a stark contrast to the deep pain etched into his weary conscience. He found not anger directed at him, but rather an unbearable silence, the understanding of shared grief lingering between them like a haunting ghost. Years crept silently by, the haunting specter of absolution never settling comfortably on his shoulders. The tension between hope and despair swirled within him as David wrestled with the bitter reality of what could never truly be undone. Redemption shimmered tantalizingly ahead, yet whether it glowed with the promise of sweet justice or loomed ominously in shadowy fate rested within the complex fabric of human existence. The consequences of his choices loomed large above him, strung tightly between regret and the unyielding weight of guilt that he could no longer escape. As David lingered at the threshold of his family's threshold, uncertainty ached painfully in his chest, and he gazed into the dying light of the day. In the midst of tension woven from choices, their consequences, and their dark aftermath, he grasped